Initial D is one of the most popular racing animes in 2025, and throughout the series, many characters use different techniques and tactics to try to beat their opponents. Today we talk about every technique used in the entire Initial D series. To give these techniques some level of order, we'll go in the same order in which they were presented in the series from first to last. Also, to demonstrate these techniques, we'll use a subtle corset to simulate what they would look like in real life. So in this case, we start with Takumi's first technique, known as the inertia drift.
Whoa! What the hell?
The inertia drift is an aggressive form of weight shifting to gain more speed through a corner at an angle where the front is a lot closer to the apex, which is the middle of a corner. It's highly recommended to do this technique on an S-shaped corner, that way it's easier and quicker to complete. There are many ways to do this trick, but the best way to do this is by slowly steering towards the outside of a corner while lifting off the throttle, but once you're at the corner's braking zone, slam on the gas immediately and turn back to the direction of the corner to swing the rear out. As you're sliding through the corner, slightly tap the brakes to shift all of the weight of the car to the opposite side, and then countersteer to level the weight out completely on all four tires, which will in turn cause something like this to happen. Now as you can see, in the middle of that drift, I had to downshift instead of just slightly braking because I was quickly running out of time to slow the car down because I needed to hold a drift for the first part a little longer due to my line not being the best. If I started the inertia drift further to the left, I could have had a bigger chance of being able to tap the brake. The second technique is pretty much just drifting in itself. It's to lock up the rear wheels temporarily, thus making the car slide by pulling the handbrake. It's probably the easiest technique to learn out of all of them in the series, and also the most common technique used in real life. The next technique shown is called a braking drift. A braking drift can be done when you'd like to drift to a corner, but without dramatically lowering your speed. You simply dive straight into a corner at a high speed, then let off the gas a few seconds before turning, and as you turn into the corner you tap the brake, but then immediately mash the throttle, while controlling the drift by countersteering if necessary. Now, if you'd like to master this technique the way Takumi did, then you'd have to figure out how to barely countersteer at all. But for beginners, I would just say to not worry too much about countersteering, because it is a pretty important part of drifting anyway. The second technique showed in the same rematch that Takumi had with Keisuke is technique number 4, the gutter run. The gutter run is probably the most straightforward technique in Initial D. It drastically increases cornering speed and makes your car almost fully immune to any type of understeer and oversteer. It's done by entering a corner as far as you can on the inside, then driving that same side of your tires into a small downhill ditch in the road. As you're driving in the gutter, you have to steer accordingly to how fast you're going. If you're going too slow into the gutter, about 25 to 30 miles an hour, then only turn a little bit. If you're going fast, about 45 miles an hour or faster, then you should turn a lot more aggressively. The main reason why you don't want to turn into the gutter too much is because you can basically destroy your rim if you clip the very end of the ditch.
Fast, sharp right. Fast, sharp right. Sharp right. Sharp right. Listen. Sammy, you have to listen to my call, Sammy. Please, I beg.
Anyway, the next technique is pretty interesting because it doesn't have an official name. So for the sake of this video, we'll just name it the Psych Out. A psych out is when you slowly go towards the outside of a corner to make your opponent think you're taking a racing line focused for exiting on the inner line, but then you immediately slam on the gas and cut in towards the inside during your opponent's braking zone. This can be incredibly effective when trying to throw off your opponent's rhythm without actually bumping them. It's mostly used when the driver in front is blocking you from overtaking and there's not many corners until the finish. The most common place to find this technique being used in real life is something circuit racing related, like 90s Japanese Touring Championships or the American Le Mans series. Technique number 6 is a bit complicated to understand, but bear with me because I'm trying to explain this in the best way possible. It's being able to steer more by using the gas pedal. Okay, firstly, I don't even see any reason to attempt this in real life because there are many other far less risky ways to turn at a high speed. One of them being, I don't know, the steering wheel. But hypothetically, if you for some reason wanted to try this, don't. Hold the steering wheel at a very slight angle, then once entering a corner, you quickly tap the brake to shift all the weight to the outer front side of the car. Remember to still keep your foot slightly on the gas while tapping the brakes so you can still keep a good speed while drifting. Now, the problem I have with this technique is that Ryosuke doesn't explain that the steering wheel has to be held at least a little bit towards the direction of the corner, because if not, then all of the weight and center of gravity will still be between the center of the car and the front, and not the front towards one of the front corners. Number 7. A number that is superstitiously looked at as a form of luck to some people, but in this case, it is sadly not. Technique number 7 is known as double crashing and bumping. Okay, I just want to clarify, don't do this. Like, you will actually die from falling off the mountain if you try this in real life. You thought that turning with the gas was bad? Well, this is 100 times worse. Anywho, double crashing is when your opponent is in front of you, so you make the absolutely menacing decision to pull alongside of them and turn your wheels toward them, which would be the opposite way of the corner is going. This will cause you to T-bone into your opponent and total their car immediately. Don't try this unless you're actually trying to hurt your opponent, or if you're trying to get 10 years in jail and get charged with attempted murder. Now, bumping is also a very unsportsmanlike technique due to it being just as bad as the double crash depending on how hard the bump is, but also in Initial D, bumping is actually a bit more common in certain races due to either worn out tires or unexpected turbo lag. But still in all, just don't do this. The next technique is a great way to combat losing control of your car in wet conditions. It's a theory Takumi quickly threw together when racing Kenta's S14 on the downhill to decrease the risk of crashing that I'll call passenger traction. Passenger traction is when you have a passenger while you're racing someone in the rain and you need extra traction for your tires to help grip the road a little more. To do this technique, you would tell the passenger to sit in the rear seats of the car just to add a little bit of traction on the back tires. Now, don't expect this to work extremely well unless someone like Dave Blunt or Queso is your passenger. If you don't have any passengers in your car but you'd like to try this, an alternative option is to maybe stack a bunch of bricks on top of one another on the rear seats of your car, because the main point of this idea is just to add as much weight on the rear as possible. Now, where would you find these bricks, you ask? Don't ask me. But if you do have some level of access to bricks, then maybe it can work in your favor. We're now approaching the final technique done in an Initial D first stage. It's known as the other gutter run. No, I'm serious, that's actually what it's called.
Maybe I should try that move Dad was telling me about. The other gutter driving thing.
Remember when I said that a gutter run is done by hooking the side tires into a gutter to make the car immune to over and understeer? Well, this is very similar, but instead of driving into the gutter from the very beginning of the corner, you would take an outer racing line where once you hit the apex, your tires will drive into the gutter on their own. But because taking an outer line on the hairpin may be a faster entry, the aggressiveness of being in the gutter will also be more aggressive, thus making it faster. The first technique shown in second stage was made by Kyoichi Sudo. It's more of a tactic to win rather than a specific action to take, but still works very well and is actually pretty common in real life. It's called Simulation 3. Simulation 3 is simple. If the opponent's car you're racing has less horsepower than yours, you give them a small head start, and then you catch up to them to study their strengths and weaknesses, and then overtake them once you see what weakness you can exploit. As long as you're aware of how to attack the mountain pass or track you're on, and you're also aware of the strengths and weaknesses of your own car, then this technique will be possible. Funny enough, that was the only known technique in the entire second season. The main reason why is mainly because Takumi actually blew the A86's engine when racing Kyoichi, and Takumi getting used to the new TRD engine that Bunta put in took up the entire season. But don't worry, because the next two techniques shown are so insane that they blow all the others out of the water. The first and only technique shown in the Season 3 movie is known as the Irazaka jump. Just as I showed, the Irazaka jump is a technique made specifically for one mountain known as the Iroha slopes. If you're struggling to overtake your opponent or want to shock your opponent for the rest of the race, you can potentially take a line where the apex leads off the ledge of a downhill hairpin, which lets you cut across the entire corner, and if done right, can show your opponent that you're basically willing to ruin your suspension to win. And believe it or not, this technique has actually been done in rally a couple Was all that necessary? And believe it or not, this technique has actually been done in rally a couple times in real life. And no, if you're thinking about doing this in real life, the construction workers that worked on the real life Eero has slopes extended the guardrails, that way doing it is impossible. There's Japanese rumors around how back in the early 2000s, very few people tried this technique, but ended up crashing because they were trying it on corners that were way more steep compared to the 33rd corner.
Ow! I tried to land.
This next technique is one of Initial D's most famous moments, and potentially one of the most deceiving techniques in the entire series. It's called the blind attack. Imagine, you're in a high-tension, fast-paced race going down a mountain pass, but there seems to be no way to overtake your opponent. So you take a very big risk by turning off your headlights and following the opponent until you see a space available. This is where you'd speed into that gap and overtake the driver and then turn your lights back on, leaving your opponent in absolute shock for the rest of the race. It's a technique that requires lots of confidence and knowledge. Now, again, this is incredibly risky because firstly, trying to overtake someone on a mountain road with two-way traffic will increase the risk of you hitting oncoming traffic on the other side. And also, the only form of light you have for yourself is the opponent's taillights and potentially their headlights, but they'll be pretty far away from what angle you need to see them at. So yeah, you're basically driving around a corner when it's pitch black and relying on somebody else's headlights to get you around them without crashing. The next technique is actually pretty interesting, but isn't really useful in real life because it'll take many times to truly nail on the first try. It's known as inner wheel lifting or gutter drifting. The last two gutter techniques we just went over were focused on cornering and speed, but some gutters don't have a slant in them that make it possible to drive into. Some just go straight down and are incredibly narrow. Examples of these gutters can be found on togeis like Momiji Line, located in Tochigi, Japan, and Nagao Pass, located in Kanagawa, Japan. Inner wheel lifting is when you're constantly drifting around a set of corners at a high speed, and once you reach one of the few corners, the weight is shifted in such a way where none of it is on the car's side that's towards the inside of the corner. Think about it like this. When you slam on the gas in a car, all the weight that gets pushed from all four tires get pushed to the two rear tires, which explains how some cars that are fine-tuned and have high horsepower can do wheelies. Well, in this case, you would slam on the gas when going around a corner to shift all the weight to the opposite side of the corner while drifting. The unrealistic thing about this technique is that it can't really be done with a normal car. In order for this to be done in real life, you would need something like a buggy with incredibly long suspension, and not to mention doing it on a corner isn't the ideal time to try it. It would be better to perform it on a very long, open area where you would just be practicing shifting weight, but without cornering. But if this technique hypothetically did work on a normal car, you wouldn't really be able to do it on a flat corner. It would either have to be elevated, or the car suspension would have to be incredibly soft to shift the weight around easier. The final main technique we'll go over today is probably the hardest to understand out of all of the ones we've gone over so far. Every time someone explains it, they either get it wrong, or it's a massive explanation that no one wants to read. It's called slip angle. I'm gonna set something straight here. Slip angle isn't really a technique. It's more of a driving style performed by Toshiya Josima when he raced Takumi. As Kozo Hoshino said, this technique isn't really drifting, nor is it gripping. Personally, I like to call it grifting. It's essentially when you push your car's tires to get more traction on the road, but by sliding slightly at the same time. You're not weight shifting in any way, but you're also not oversteering. It's that very small stitch between grip driving and sliding. The actions that are taken to perform it don't come off as sliding, but in a way the car is technically drifting a little bit. Slip angle can constantly be confused with four-wheel drifting, which is very similar because it does distribute power to all four wheels, but not in the exact same way slip angle does. Sadly, I can't explain exactly how to recreate this driving style because it comes down to you knowing the minimal amount of traction your car would need for it to not slide. But once you find out that amount and start practicing it, you'll eventually adapt to it. Slip angle also has a small connection to how much you have to steer in order to achieve this driving style. As we can see in the anime, Josima only uses his right hand to steer because using both hands may give the car too much steering force, which will in turn potentially cause him to spin out. Basically, it's slightly drifting, but with a car that's tuned for gripping. Now that we've gone over all the main techniques, here's some quick bonus techniques in the anime that I didn't bother adding into the video because they're not really important to the plot. You've got this one thing called left foot braking, where if you're driving a front wheel drive car, you keep your right foot on the gas and your left foot slightly on the brake. It's useful in racing due to it minimizing the amount of time it would take to move your foot from the throttle to the brake because your foot is already on the brake. Another bonus technique is called the Fujiwara zone. In a nutshell, it's Takumi's ability to accelerate an FR car, rear-wheel drive front-engine car, like an all-wheel drive car. However, the animators of Initial D wanted to show how insane this is by showing Takumi's 86 almost teleporting across the corner. Doing this technique is next to impossible because of the amount of focus, precision, and subconscious flow state you need is something that the human brain just isn't capable of. Which is why some people call his technique either supernatural or just straight up blasphemy because it surpasses the amount of control you can have over your car. There's also some jokes a lot of people make every now and then saying that the Fujiwara zone is just Takumi's 86 rubber banding around the track like it has bad Wi-Fi connection. So after almost 16 minutes, we've gone over all the techniques shown in Initial D. I hope this video helped you understand that there are many things you can do to become faster at driving, and that if you practice all these techniques for long enough, you can be just as fast as Takumi from Initial D. I hope you enjoyed this video and hope to see you on the next one.